Gil Fronsdal is the guiding teacher of the Insight Meditation Center, IMC, in Redwood City, California. Gil has a PhD in Buddhist studies from Stanford University. No big deal. He has also been meditating and studying Buddhism since 1975. He's practiced and studied within both the Theravadan and Zen traditions. He was ordained as a priest in the Soto Zen tradition in 1982, was ordained as a monk in Burma in the Theravadan tradition in 1985. He has a deep practice. He's a wonderful teacher. He's also a husband and a father, and the author of the, in my view, incredible book on Buddhist practice and mindfulness practice called The Issue at Hand, one of my favorite Dharma books, and he's written some other books as well. He has a vast compendium of audio teachings available online at audiodharma.org. Gil, is there anything that you want to say before we get started with our conversation?
I don't think so. I'm happy to be here, and I don't have. It was very nice to sit with you all and to know that you exist this way, and so that's. I don't have anything else on my mind, but I'm very happy to be in conversation with you all.
Wonderful. So we're very glad to have you here with us. What we're going to do is, you and I have talked about this, but for everyone else, what we're going to do is Gil and I are going to chat, just him and me, for about 30 minutes, which is not only fun for me, but more importantly, helps sort of prep the Q&A and seed some potential questions. And then we'll open it up to the whole group for Q&A, and we'll do that for about an hour. So Gil has really kindly given us a fair amount of his time. So thank you for that. And let's chat. You and I talked the last time we spoke about how I find that sometimes this tends to slip into just a one-on-one Q&A. And it's more fun when it's sort of a conversation. Now, it's usually my fault. So I'm going to do what I can to try and make it more conversation-y. But, we'll see how it goes. So, there are a couple of things I would love to talk to you about, but one of them is, I'm sure you talk about this a lot, but you have sort of straddled both sort of streams of Buddhist practice. You were a monk, a renunciant, and now you're not just a layperson, but sort of the ultimate layperson. You're a parent, right, and a partner. So I'm wondering, are there obviously there are advantages to practicing as a monk. Are there advantages in terms of the ripening of your Dharma practice, in terms of realization, in terms of your progress along the path or your understanding of the path? Are there advantages to being a layperson that are less available to monastics? And what are they, if so?
I think for a number of people, lay life offers a lot more challenges. And they offer challenges, interpersonal challenges and personal challenges that are sometimes don't come up when a person is a monastic. And so to be able to practice in the context of these challenges, of the feedback you get, sometimes the feedback of a spouse is spouse sees us in all our different colors and all our different shades and who we are. And whereas your meditation teacher might see you only in a limited view, the abbot of monastery might see you only in a limited area of how you conduct yourself.
Sure.
And the demands of domestic life, especially raising children, are kind of constant. And there's no, obvious way out. Monastic life you can get out of pretty easily.
Yeah, no obvious one, certainly.
And so, if that life is challenging for you, you get to see those challenges. And that was the case for me. It was pretty natural for me to be a monk. I loved it. It was seemed like the perfect lifestyle. I was very, it had its challenges, but I just slipped right in like a fish in water or something.
Yeah.
Most part.
That of course raises the question, why'd you leave?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have it wasn't like a clear idea to leave the monastic life or something, to go to do something else.
Okay.
Um, I guess for me, there's a third option here. There's monastic life, there is lay life, domestic life, and then there's following the Dharma life. And so some point in my life, began when I was a college student. I started to meditate twice a day. That something happened inside of me that showed me a way forward with the Dharma. And I just kept following that path and following what opened up, or what that calling was, what was next. And after 10 years of intensive practice, meditation practice, monastic life, I'd completed something. And to continue in the monastery was no longer appropriate. And I didn't want to leave Buddhism exactly. And it's a little complicated, but I kind of, this a little bit complicated story, but I kind of ended up out of just following that Dharma path as a layperson. No longer, it was no longer appropriate to be immersed in a monastic life anymore. And so then what were the options?
Right.
And didn't want to leave Buddhism so far behind. I mean, that was I dedicated myself to it. And so I thought, well, I thought maybe if I can go get a master's in religious studies, studying Buddhism, then I could maybe go teach Buddhist studies at a junior college, and somehow stay close to Buddhism and make a living. Otherwise, I didn't know how I was going to make a living.
Yeah.
I didn't have any particular skills. Also, part of the monastic, a big part for me of the monastic practice I had was at the San Francisco Zen Center, which in San Francisco Zen Center was kind of, in a sense, that a monastic, but it was a lay monastic tradition in that you can get married in the Japanese Zen Buddhism. So even there were married couples who lived in the monastery and follow a monastic schedule. And so we didn't exactly have to be celibate, for example.
Yeah.
But it was that lifestyle. And most of the time I was there, I was celibate, but I did meet during that end of that time, I did meet my woman who was going to become my wife.
Yeah.
And when I decided to go to graduate school, she decided to follow me along, and it just the path opened up, and after a while it made sense to get married, and it seemed like the right thing to do. And after a while, it kind of made sense to have a child, and that's what we did. And it all kind of evolved or unfolded to this Dharma path for me, what seemed right to do and how to find my way forward.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of a path that included both monastic and lay, without a strong feeling for me that I was leaving one for the other.
Right. And it doesn't sound like when you moved into lay life after the monastery, it doesn't sound like you left or made that transition with an attitude of, I made a mistake, I shouldn't have been a monk, right? Mm-hmm. I'm undoing that mistake by going back to lay life. That's not what I'm hearing at all. I'm hearing that was a valuable phase and period, and then you moved on to another valuable phase that was appropriate for the time. And do I have that more correct?
Yeah, that's closer to how it was, yes.
Yeah, so this brings me to the sort of sore spot, the sort of canker sore on the roof of my mouth that I always find myself poking, which is the path of awakening, or the path of, you've distinguished in some of your writing between the path of liberation and the path of worldly well-being. And and you and I have had conversations, including a somewhat intense conversation, about the path of liberation and what it entails and what it demands of the practitioner. And so for you, your path went through a period of monasticism and renunciation. And I'm wondering, and I think I know the answer, but I don't just want the answer. I want to have a whole discussion with you about it, is, for a person who does not see monasticism in their future, either because it's not the way they're inclined or because perhaps they already have a family, right? They've already made commitments where they're not leaving to go to a monastery. Is the path of liberation available to them? Or to even be blunter, if we're going to use Theravada Buddhist terminology just for convenience, is, for instance, stream entry a realistic goal for a person who isn't going to enter a monastery, who is living a lay life? And then I'm curious to unpack whichever way we go with that.
Well, if you want a simple answer, the answer is yes, it's available. If you want to, I don't know if that's helpful to say that, except maybe it's encouraging.
I think it's certainly helpful, because it means that it's not there's a simple answer and it's no, right? So so having eliminated that, now there's a beautiful bouquet of possibilities that we can explore. So yeah, let's make it complicated now.
And some of it, of course, some of it has to do with how anybody defines something like stream entry or awakening, and different teachers define it differently, different traditions define it differently, and some of them maybe make it much more accessible than others by their definition, and then the ones who make it more difficult say, well, those people don't have the real one.
Yeah.
And so then we go on and around in circles.
We can only use our own best definition, right? Like I can only ask you based on how you like to use that term, if you like to use it, or what you identify that with, right? Because what else can we really do?
Yeah, and then it also depends. The answer also depends on the individual, and for some people, for the answer you asked, I gave you kind of a generic answer. If it has to do with any one individual, the answer might be no, because maybe on one hand, maybe their lay life is just so crazy that they might be lucky to meditate 2 minutes a day,
right?
And is that going to be enough to get enlightened? Other people, they have some kind of for who knows why, there are people who have a tremendously easy access to deep concentration, and other people for whom it never have access to it.
Yep.
And so those who have very deep access to concentration, for example, they might not need to go off very much on retreat or go off on a long retreat. They might be lucky to have the first retreat and they have some kind of stream entry experience.
Yeah, they're Deepa Ma or someone like that.
Someone like that. So there's amazing people, and there's people who have it kind of accidentally in daily life and they don't know what happened.
Yeah, and, I really shake my fist at those people. But no, that's wonderful. Awesome.
So it all depends on the person. And some people have difficult personalities, and so they want to put themselves in a situation where those difficult personalities really get challenged. And for some of them, lay life doesn't challenge them enough. Some people, lay life, like for me, monastic life was easy, and there's a whole bunch of things that weren't challenged until I had kids. And that was really hard for me. And I got to see aspects of my attachments, my fears, my priorities, my reactivity, in all kinds of ways I never saw in the monastery. So, if I got some degree of awakening in the monastery, that was like maybe like a gem that was all dusty. And so it started to get cleaned in lay life, and it became much more available, and it's much more interesting, and I became much freer in the process of dealing with all this in lay life. I feel I'm a better person because of it. So I'm very glad for having done both.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so, what you're talking about reminds me a little bit of, or it's like a little bit analogous to the sort of old, I can't remember if it was in the suttas or the Visuddhimagga, but where it's sort of like, well, if your issue is anger or ill will, your meditation object should be loving kindness. If you tend toward discursive thinking, it should be the breath. If if it tends to be lust, the 32 parts of the body, whatever. That sort of personalizing, customizing, almost diagnostician's approach to practice. And it sounds to me like you're sort of describing, you were giving it sort of descriptively, not prescriptively, but this idea of, well, take a look at what you need, right? And take a look at what you can't, what comes naturally to you, what comes and what doesn't. Pay careful attention to what tends to snag you and what tends to go smoothly for you. And it might be that you might need some time in a monastery, or it might also be, it sounds like, that you can calibrate your life a little bit, even your lay life, based on a thoughtful understanding of what those things are that hitch you up. Would you say that's right? And that, it's possible to even sort of smooth the path for yourself based on knowing those propensities, those strengths and weaknesses, those challenges and inclinations?
I think so. It's better not to rely too much on only yourself. It's good to get feedback from a sangha, other people who know your practice, teachers and all that. Yeah. Because we can fool ourselves a little bit, or maybe do the wrong practices for ourselves or something. But one of the very important things happening in the modern world is the opportunity for lay people to go on meditation retreats. Oh, yeah. This is a relatively new thing. The lay people could always meditate, but it's only in the last 100 years or so that there's been a real movement of bringing meditation retreats to laity and have retreat centers that are specialized for people to come to visit. Suppose the monastery people live for years. Retreat center, they go for a week or a month or some length of time. And so, when I went to Thailand to practice there, very few of the monks in Thailand actually meditated. People associated monks with being meditators, but actually a lot of them never meditated. And some of them spent a good amount of time watching TV in the monastery. So, their dedication to meditation was not always that high. And so some of the lay people who go on 2 or 3 retreats a year and meditate every day at home are doing considerably more regular meditation than a good number of monastics. And so we shouldn't think that, like, if the meditation is the main reference point for monastic life, if practicing daily life is the reference point for it, there's a lot of benefits for being in some monasteries. But there's kind of a lot of the benefits of monastic life are found from regular retreat practice, is found from meditating every day, is found in beginning to approach work as your place of work as a monastery itself, and engage in it with its demands and its needs and all that, schedules, its challenges, to discover our attachments, discover compassion, discover all kinds of things. And I've seen people flower in approaching their whole life as practice in a way that their monastics don't necessarily flower. Yeah. Just being a monastic doesn't mean, some monasteries are really good for practice and all this, but that's not what the monastic life is necessarily about. Yeah, for sure. I remember I was in Laos quite a while ago now, and I had the grand ambition to sit in monasteries. I was still very preoccupied with where I was meditating. Right, I was going to meditate somewhere cool with carved Buddha statues, and that was going to really get me where I needed to go. And the monks just wanted to show me their mini disc players, right? That was really what they were into, and like sort of playing little pranks on me. And they thought I was very silly sitting there. So yeah, that sort of shook me out of it very quickly. So not just sort of fetishizing the monastic life, but also my own nonsense around, my meditating in a monastery is going to make me sort of a holy being. But since it's supposed to be a conversation, maybe I can ask you a question then. Yeah, of course you can. What was your motivation to do that? To go sit in the monasteries? Yeah, to go find a monastery to meditate in. I mean, keeping it all the way real with you, Yeah.
back in 2008. Um, with the benefit of hindsight, I think a lot of the motivation was to have a sort of cool narrative of a hero's journey that I was going on. Like I honestly think a lot of my initial attraction to Buddhism, to meditation, I don't want to be too pejorative or too hard on myself. I say this with love and sort of amusement, but I think there was a special boy narrative to it that I enjoyed. The ability, I might have access to unusual insights, special abilities that others didn't have, secrets, a view of the world to which many were not privy, right? So ironically, there was a lot of ego, The good news is that it's a practice that sort of is self-cleaning in that regard.
And so at what point, so that's great that you see that, know that about yourself. So I'd assume if that was the motivation, you hadn't really found the path yet.
It doesn't sound like it.
You were on there was a different path. You were on the ego path. And so when do you feel like you discovered the Dharma path for yourself?
Well, do you think it's so cut and dry? In other words, there's certainly no ego in my current path, right? It's not like, oh, that was then and now I am, I am, the lotus has transcended the mud and the water entirely. No way, right? So I don't know. I think it's been I don't think I hadn't found the Dharma path at all then. And I don't think I've entirely abandoned the ego path now, right? But, there were some inflection points, right? Where it became clearer that being so fixated on practice as a way to aggrandize the self was actually painful, was actually causing me suffering. And that made it sort of easier to let go in that classic hot coal reflexive way. I don't know, 2014 or something, 6 years into my 6 to 8 years into my practice.
So at some point in these inflection points, did the motivation change?
Yeah.
And what was the new motivation?
This feels weird, by the way. No one's ever done this to me.
Oh, I thought we were supposed to do a conversation. So.
No, it's good. It's good. Let's do it. It's good. It's fine. Love it. Love what's happening, and I feel very comfortable. Did the motivation change? The mix of the motivation changes, right? Like the mix of the motivation changes. Yeah.
But when would you? When do you think you recognized something that you feel today would be more? You can change the vocabulary if you want, but more a Dharma motivation than a egotistical motivation.
Yeah. Well, I can think of sort of two. I don't know the exact moment in time, but I think there was always a sense of wanting to be a quote unquote better person. But I think when I realized after doing practice that I don't have to be a perfect altruist, I don't have to be a perfect bodhisattva, I just have to be altruistic enough to want to be more so, if that makes sense. That was sort of all I needed to get me on the sort of upward spiral of practice. When it occurred to me like, oh, I don't need to be a perfect being, and it's okay that is, still a work in progress. I just need to have enough of that to want to cultivate more of that. And then that is a sort of chain reaction that, so that was sort of an early-ish thought. And then the other one was a moment on a retreat when I became very clearly aware of how much it hurt. Yeah, how much it hurt to to fixate on my sense of self as something that I need to defend, aggrandize, compare favorably to the perceived selves of others. And I remember I wrote down in my little journal at the time that I was still keeping, I just wrote like, I can't wait to be rid of this. It hurts, I'm hurting myself. I can't wait to be free of this. And so the sort of altruistic motivation came in that earlier moment. And then the sort of, I don't know if you want to call it the renunciatory motivation, or just this feeling of all this complexity and all this selfing is hurting me. What if I was able to radically simplify and let this stuff go? Maybe that would actually be better than trying to achieve all these grand selfie ambitions.
Great. So that became more your Dharma motivation to go and retreat in the future, or to practice was to be able to let go of your attachments to self, your selfishness and self-preoccupation, and let go of that pain. And that became a motivating force?
Yeah, I think I think that's right. I think when those sort of egotistical thoughts, comparing thoughts, ambition thoughts, self-aggrandizing thoughts came up, the instinct to immediately set about trying to achieve them as a means of easing that pain became more obviously a trap and became less attractive than the path of dropping all that nonsense, which had come to seem more actually doable, and the sort of fruits of that I'd experienced enough of them, even a little bit, to see that was actually that was actually much more viable. That was actually the real way to go. That the other way was sort of a trap. But it was an instinct, to feel these sort of selfing inclinations, and then to think the way to make myself feel better, to ease this pain, is to set about achieving those things, to sort of resolve these things, instead of just sort of abandoning them. Yeah, and that abandonment became increasingly attractive to me. Yeah.
So then, as you had this motivation then for the abandonment, how did you decide when to go and retreat, and when to do that abandonment work in relationship with a partner or with work or something like that? Did you bifurcate your life with one place you could do the abandonment and one place you didn't, or did you see the opportunity in both places? Or
well, it's hard. I'm definitely still figuring it out. But I do try and do both, but I tend to see, rightly or wrongly, I tend to see retreat as an important part. It's just sort of proven itself to me over and over again in terms of how useful and valuable it is. And I do feel, at least for me, the way I'm configured, it seems like it's an indispensable part of the path to me. And so, I had to work that out with my partner, and we've had a lot of tricky conversations about it, and she's compromised and I've compromised, and we've tried to figure out what compromise looks like and what sort of compromise we feel comfortable asking of the other person. And
but if I understand what you're saying compromise about you going on retreat so you can be less, you can abandon selfishness, right?
Yeah, I feel like I'm walking into a trap, but yes.
You are walking into a trap.
No. Okay.
I wouldn't have called it that. I was hoping to have you answer your own questions that you're asking me. See how if you can do that on your own, but if it can look like a trap, and because then you're living a bifurcated life. If the place to abandon self is to compromise with your wife and partner and then go off on retreat. And what if you try to do the abandonment in the relationship with her?
Well, what does that mean? Like, I mean, if we're gonna really get down to it and be very real about it, I mean, what if I can't? Like what if I like for example, Gil, just so you know a little bit more about me,
Yeah.
um, this really shouldn't be okay, this is fine. Um, uh, I have ADHD. I was diagnosed quite young. Um, and so when you talk about people who, for instance, don't naturally experience deep concentration, I'm one of those people. Now I have experienced deep concentration, but let me tell you, that took some doing. That took some time in the desert alone. And so I love, like, it sounds lovely, right? Like, well, what if you made your relationship your practice? What if you made, do you know what I mean? Like, or what if you made your job into a mindful? I hear things like that and I see the intrinsic appeal, but what if brass tacks, I'm one of those people who needs a little more in terms of the conducive conditions in order to get to those places. It's all well and good for Deepa Ma to say, oh, just do it, raise your kid, do your thing, live in Kolkata, whatever. But, what if you're not Deepa Ma?
So one answer from your life, for yourself, is that you're not going to get enlightened in a lay life unless you go do this temporary monastic thing, this retreats. That's kind of what you feel.
That is what I feel, right? Now, look, I would never be mad about being proven wrong about that, right? And I also don't want to get so fixed on my views that I turn it into a self-fulfilling prophecy. I certainly don't want that. But I also don't feel that it's super selfish, I understand the irony that you were pointing to, in terms of becoming less selfish, less self-oriented. So you're going and bailing on your partner for a period. But if I can get, there was actually a passage that someone who I think is actually here in the group shared, where she talked specifically about, and then we can cut to the group Q&A, but I don't want to say that like I'm trying to squirm out. I'm not trying to squirm out. But I'm trying to find this passage. Here it is. When you practice a musical instrument, you have to go off and play by yourself. Nobody accuses you of being selfish because they know that in order to perform well, you have to devote hours to the practice so that you can get really good. You don't want to impose your unskillful playing on audiences. They wouldn't come to listen. And everyone recognizes that it takes hours to develop that kind of skill. Many, many hours, et cetera, et cetera. The same principle applies to meditation. There's a good reason why it's called practicing, to live with a mind that's centered, mindful, alert, wise, compassionate, so et cetera. Thoughts on my skillful retort?
Oh, I love that quote, and I think it makes very good sense as a response to people say going off and meditating is selfish.
Yeah,
I appreciate it a lot.
Which I didn't, which is not exactly what I heard you saying. But I mean, part of what I wanted to a little bit, I mean, I'm not so clear what I was trying to do, but a little bit of what I was trying to do was to emphasize that once we know our priorities and know our motivations clearly, then we can ask ourselves questions: what supports that? Yeah.
And then we can but we can also ask us a second question, not just what supports it as if there's one thing and over something else, but we can also ask, how can I accomplish that with the life that I have? So if you're understanding your motivation now is to abandon selfishness, which is a great noble quest, it's happy to hear this, then yes, maybe going off on retreats works well for you, but it's also a great question to ask, given who you are, your particular, the gifts of your mind, and I'd like to call ADHD a gift rather than a disease. With the gifts of your mind, how do you do that in the rest of your life? How do you do it in your partnership?
Yeah.
And it might be a simple, not just, compromising when you need to compromise, but it might mean telling your partner, this is what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
Can you help be a partner for me as I try to do this and hold me accountable to it, and that I'm trying to do this.
Yeah. And let me just briefly shout out my partner for being that person. She is wonderfully supportive, and she does try to understand, even if it's not her path, in it, for her specifically. But no, we do try and have those sorts of conversations, and she understands how important it is to me, and why, she tries to understand why it means to me what it does. And so, yeah, that's what we're trying to do. And even the conversations around retreat are part of that broader conversation of this life that we're building together. How do we build rooms in that house that are meditation rooms, essentially,
And this is one of the a question earlier about the difference between monastic life and lay life. This is one of the gifts of lay life, especially committed lay lives with, it doesn't have to be a primary partner. It could be with longtime friends, and, people who know us, is that the depth of knowing each other, the depth of what's shared and what's touched and what's challenged in us, sometimes in these really close ongoing relationships, is something monastics sometimes have, but sometimes they don't have it in the same way. There's certainly, monastic life is full of interpersonal challenges, but they might stay a little bit more on the surface level in some way, and they work it out and manage to get along. But then they go off to the next monastery, or, things change. But when you stay with the same friends for a long time, and especially when you live together, that's a whole powerful path. That can be a powerful path in its own right, because of the especially if honesty is at the forefront of the relationship.
Yeah. Yeah.
My introduction to spirituality was in a hippie commune that discovered at some point, because they were getting arrested, that until their spiritual sacrament was LSD. But then they realized they couldn't do that anymore. And so they tried to figure out a different thing. This was a big commune. There were 700 people who lived in it. And so then they realized that they couldn't do LSD anymore. So they looked for an alternative. And they found that the alternative that was as powerful as LSD is honesty. And when I saw lived in this community and saw what honesty can do, that's what opens the door for spirituality for me, spiritual practice.
Huh. That was how they framed it themselves, that they were shifting from
LSD to honesty.
From
LSD to honesty.
Yeah, as their sort of new sacrament.
Yeah.
Huh. Well, someday, when you hopefully bless us with another visit, another conversation, if that ever happens, I want to know more about what that means, because I don't even understand. But I want to find out. I am really glad that we're having this conversation, Gil, though as visibly uncomfortable as it is perhaps making me. I think it's really good. And like this, even this group, Sitheads, its sort of purpose, or one of its purpose, is, it's a bunch of people who are trying to be serious about this practice and take it sort of seriously on its face. And we don't want to have to sort of dilute it. We don't want to have to sort of create a little Tykes version of it and do that. I'm not accusing anyone else of doing that either, by the way, but we want to figure out what that looks like for a 21st century layperson in this world. And so, and sometimes the conversations, it's very easy to get into quite rigid. Well, how much practice do you think you need to do per day to do that? Or how much retreat do you need to go on? And that's, and I appreciate your very gentle, very wise refusal to let the conversation fall into those perhaps too easy tracks, and to sort of engage the messier, more complex dynamics there.
Great. Yeah, great. So maybe one of the people when they ask questions now, maybe someone will ask me a question along those lines, but it could be, how much honesty do you need to get enlightened?
How much honesty do you need to really trip hard? How much, what's the unit? What are the units? What's the conversion rate between LSD and honesty?
Do we have to worry about a bad trip?
Yeah. All right. Well, this was marvelous. I really got a lot out of this. It was a very rich conversation. Thank you, Gil. Thanks so much for having it with me. And so now we are going to mercifully turn the spotlight away from me and to the group. So let's do some Q&A. And let's begin with the man who is largely responsible for this even happening, the person who reached out to Gil in the first place, the absolute king, Fred. Fred, do you want to ask your question of Gil?
Yeah, that's quite an introduction. But yeah, I can ask it. First of all, it's so good to have you here, Gil. I'm really glad you and John were able to find a spot. Thank you so much. So there was a kind of a big introduction in my head to that question, but I'm just going to invite you to talk about the urgency of having a spiritual practice.
The urgency of it. No, I'm not sure how to answer that question the way it was framed. I don't think that there's any obligation to do spiritual practice. The universe wasn't built that way. However, there are people who discover a very healthy sense of urgency. And some of those is because they're going to die. And they don't want to die before doing this work. It's so important. They don't want to keep suffering the way they've been doing. Other people have the urgency because this world is suffering so much. And they want to make the world a better place by starting with themselves and making themselves into a person who can really contribute something different in the world than a Band-Aid. So I think some individuals have that urgency. So hearing my answer, maybe now you can tell me a little bit more. What was behind your question? Why the question?
Oh, well, I can talk about the intro then. I was just, I contacted you after listening to your 3-part series, Candid and Dharma. And at the beginning of the second episode, you talk about how in Zen monasteries, it would smash a wooden block on the ground when starting a meditation session. And on the other side of it, there was something written along the lines of life and death are the great matter. Practice as if your hair is on fire. Don't waste time. And I was at work when I listened to that quote, and it just really struck me and became my favorite Dharma quote. And yeah, I was just wondering if you could talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, it's possible to have that motivation, and really that it really wakens up a strong sense of urgency, a drive, and motivation, and nothing else can be more important for some people. And they really wanted, and they realize they don't have much time, and let's get to work here and do it. And then the art of it is how to do it with a head on fire, that we don't just make it more difficult for ourselves because we're striving so much, and rushing, and it just it evokes all kinds of attachments to practice and goals and attainments. So how do you practice as if your hair's on fire with the appropriate non-attachment, appropriate ease, steadiness, calm, dedication. And one answer to that question is you make the practice the priority for your life. Nothing else is more important. And then you understand how you can practice in everything you do. So the purpose of what you're doing is not the conventional, obvious purpose that people see, but for you, it's the purpose is here too. I'm going to practice the Dharma in this activity. So you don't, if you're washing dishes, you don't wash the dishes quickly to get it over with. You wash the dishes to really have that be your monastery, to that be your place of practice. And so urgency has a lot to do with priorities. And so I think someone who has that urgency, the idea is to make, just one opportunity, there's no obligation, but one opportunity is to make it the thing of your life. Everything else is oriented, circles around it. And so in that regard, people say, and the question is, that people often ask is, how could I integrate my practice into my rest of my life? Now, there's another question, which I think is more profound for people who have the urgency. The question is, how do I integrate my life into my practice?
Yeah, this is great. Thank you so much for the answer, for the time.
Great, thank you. Thank you for inviting me here.
It's great, thank you.
Thank you, Fred. Thanks, Gil. Liz, do you want to ask your question? Great to see you again, by the way.
Hi, Mr. Fronsdal. Hello. I've been away from the group for a while, and I was wanting to come back. I was really embarrassed to come back, and it happened to be tonight that these two are going to be doing it, so I thought I could do it, slip in with them, and you're here, and it just feels like synchronicity, and I feel very lucky. And I thought that was an amazing discussion you had with John, and I'm feeling it. It's resonating with a lot of things going on for me. So, okay, I have two questions, if I may. I'm trying not to be distracted by seeing myself on camera. I have two questions, if I may.
Liz, I'm sorry to interrupt. Is it okay if we just do one question to start? And then if we end up with time for more questions, we can circle back to your second one. Sorry, okay. I forgot to sort of say I was going to say it after Fred, but I forgot the old one question policy. I'm sorry. Is that okay?
No, it's okay. And it makes me question which of my questions is more important. And that's a good thing to think about. Right. And I think they're equally important, but I'm going to choose one. The idea of saying that practice is the most important thing is hard for me. I have 4 children, and it feels like heretical and a repudiation of me as a mom and a repudiation of my kids to even think about anything being more important than my kids. They might have a better understanding of it than I do, right? They might forgive me for that more than I would forgive me for that. But, how can I say that? And how can I say that?
Yeah. So this morning I talked to a woman who's dying of cancer. She's probably dying in the next few days. She has a 10-year-old son. And how she dies is going to be probably affect her son for the rest of her son's life. Very formative. And if she can die at peace, and the son can feel that peace, that he's going to understand something about life that's going to be invaluable. If she dies angry or in fear, he's going to take that in some powerful way. So what's more important for her these next few days, her practice or her family?
Well, I would, say, well, it's her family, but, we're going to say practice because that's really talking about her family being more important. That's how I kind of wiggle out of that.
What if they're not as separate? Maybe the separation of the two is the false, not a useful, not necessary separation. Or in my life, I put practice at the center of my life. No question about it. More important than my family and my kids. But because of that Dharma, the center of my life, I'm actually more committed, more involved with my family, more caring for them than I would be if I didn't have the Dharma at the center.
Could you tell your kids that my practice is more important than you? Would you? Is it important to communicate that?
I'm reluctant to answer the question that way, because I don't know if I'd frame it for them in that way, even though I kind of said it to you that because I was going along with your questions, but your way you said it. But it's always good to hesitate to accept the rhetoric people are offering you, to the definitions, the conditions of the conversation, and now you've gone so far. I don't know if I would ever come in a situation with them that would come up to in that definition. But I think they know that. I don't know what they know. That they know that I dedicate my life to this practice, to the Dharma, to teaching, and they dedicate their life to something else, and we love each other. And I don't really see a difference between the Dharma and my relationship with people, but I do feel that I'm never going to be apart from the Dharma. I'm going to be apart from my family. My kids have grown up; they're mostly gone and away, and the Dharma. What I learned early on in having kids was how much I had to keep letting go of them. Without letting go of them, it wouldn't have been healthy for them. So it was progressive, and I was usually a little bit behind the curve as they were growing up, but they were ready for independence. Okay, here we go again. And by the time I learned to do it, one phase, they were already on to the next phase. So this learning to let go is Dharma. So our kids need that too.
That's a nuance. I can't tell you how helpful that is. Thank you very much.
What you raise is very important, and I hope that whatever way I answered, you don't take that to be the right answer. It's just my attempt to try to be in conversation with you, and at the most I can hope for is to give you it's giving you something to think about.
I was just going to say I'm going to write some notes and I'm going to think about it. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Liz, and welcome back. It's really great to have you here. And thank you, of course, Gil. Really appreciate it. So, Josh, do you want to ask your question?
Sure, thanks. First time here, obviously. It's pretty cool. And I don't know, I just kind of get a little bit giddy seeing and talking to Gil even though it's virtually, right? So I wanted to know, maybe this is kind of too of a flashy question, but when was like the last time you've been like shaken to your core, shaken to the bones, where, you know what I mean, right? Like it's like, but then how did you respond to that? And like, did you have a reaction or was there a response?
I'm not sure if this answers the question, but what comes to mind is that I was teaching a meditation retreat, probably a week or 2-week long retreat. So when I'm teaching retreat, I'm also kind of on retreat. So I'm doing a lot of meditation and that's much more open, receptive state than I would be maybe not on retreat. And it was during the shooting at Sandy Hook, and I was reading about it during a break in the retreat, and I went from instantaneously. It was like just being pretty equanimous and peaceful, and just reading it in a sense, and then as an explosion, I started sobbing. I was shaken to the core.
I don't know what to say, Gil. There's some things I could say here, but I just don't know this group well enough to respond how I want to respond to that, nor I don't know. It's a brilliant answer. Thank you, Gil. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Maybe some
Thank
other
you,
day.
Josh. Thanks, and thanks, Gil. Let's see. Who's next? Okay. Matthew, go for it.
Hello, thank you for being here. So I read your book, The Buddha Before Buddhism, I think is what it's called, something along those lines. And for people who don't know, it's kind of about the really early teachings of the Buddha and translations and kind of explanations of that. So the question that I have is, I've never personally cared a ton, like what exactly the Buddha taught, like what was, okay, but what did he really say? Like I've never sort of super cared about that. And I've kind of just follow what seems true to me, which to me ends up being like Zen, or a particular sort of little branch of Zen. But, the more I study and, being with this group, you see that there are a lot of different ways of looking at Buddhism. And I'm not convinced they're all the same or lead to the sort of the same place. And so I'm wondering for you, like, how do you sort of think about it for yourself and scholarly? Like, are you concerned with, oh, what did the Buddha really say? Or is it more just sort of what's true or useful? How do you kind of think about that?
Probably all of the above. So let me try to find my way to an answer for you. Maybe it's a little bit long. So I practiced, pretty intensely for 10 years. And, that's basically what I did. And I was outside of a monastery, a retreat center for maybe one or 2 weeks a year. But otherwise I was in there. At some point that period came to an end. And so, as I said earlier, I went to get a master's in religious studies, study Buddhism, and it was like a kid in a candy store, because I hadn't really studied much Buddhism at that point. And after 2 years of getting my master's, I felt like that was fun, and I don't have anything else to do. I mean, it wasn't like I was, I had other career job interests, and it wasn't right to go back to the monastery, and it was fun to study. So I applied for a doctoral program, thinking I wouldn't get accepted. I thought I'll just apply. I had 2 of them. I applied for 2, and I got accepted. And and then it turned out that doctoral programs are very different than master's programs, and especially at academic research institutions. And I was kind of in shock what I found, in contrast to what I had before. But I got interested in pursuing it because that level of deeper study at that point, because of something that happened to me in my undergraduate studies. In my undergraduate studies, I was going to become a farmer, and I was studying agronomy, the art and science of field crop management. And but I was also interested in organic farming. And I was I was an activist on campus for doing all kinds of things about organic farming. So I was very interested in it. And I came to study with already a lot of preconceived ideas about both organic farming, but also commercial farming and pesticides and fertilizers. And as I started studying the science of it all, I discovered that I was a organic gardener fundamentalist, and that I had these ideas that I had taken in from books and all kinds of places about things that turned out not to be true. And I was stunned at how much I had really believed this is the truth, and it turned out they weren't. So when I went to do this doctoral program in religious studies to study Buddhism, I remember that, and I was becoming, at that time, I was being trained to be a teacher, a Buddhist teacher. And I said, religion is filled with people who say what's the truth. And I don't want to fall into the same trap as I did as when I was studying farming. I want to be more sensitive and more self-aware of what I believe and how I believe it and the underlying assumptions, and the context of it. I want to be wise so I don't end up being a fundamentalist as a Buddhist. And so that was one of the things that drove my study, and that continues to drive me a little bit. So that book that you referred to was part of the interest I have in discovering, reading what the earliest teachings of the Buddha is about, is not only to discover what the Buddha might have taught, but also to free myself or free Buddhism, as if I could, from Buddhist fundamentalists, which there are, and who think they know exactly what the Buddha taught, but actually he didn't. And so to actually see that for myself and to be able to see then, oh, this is fundamentalist. They're stuck on an idea. I have this idea that that's helpful for me and helpful for the world. So that's a partial answer, but probably enough for now.
Thanks. Yeah, I could ask a million follow-ups, but I won't because of time. Thank you though. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Matthew. Thank you, Gil. So let's see, who's next? There's a question sent to me to ask. So here is the question. In his talks, Gil rarely talks about jhana, but he does often talk about samadhi. Does his use of the word samadhi encompass the jhana states?
It can, yes, absolutely. But I put a tremendous value on samadhi and concentration, and will guide people through jhana practice on retreat or in their practice, if that seems appropriate. It's true that I'm not enamored with the jhanas as being the thing to do, and people have to do it. Some people get levels of concentration that, in short of jhana, are just as helpful for the purposes of insight practice. But there has to be some level of concentration for insight practice, and I think that message hasn't been told very clearly and explicitly. So my style of teaching, when I teach alone, is I like to see that developing concentration, developing mindfulness go together. They go hand in hand, and rather than being two separate paths. And then depending on the individual, some people who have a capacity for strong concentration might go through the jhanas. And I think that's a wonderful path for those people. But I don't want to set it up as being everyone has to do that, because some people will never have a jhana experience, but they can have a very profound practice without it. And so so that's maybe one of the reasons I don't talk about it too much publicly, is so that people for whom it's not appropriate for don't feel left behind or left out, or feel that they have to huff and puff really hard, hitting their head against the wall for something that's not going to happen.
Well, that, makes a ton of sense. So it's not my question, but it is a useful answer for me. So
yeah,
thanks.
I love the question. I appreciate that someone would ask that.
Yeah, thank you, anonymous questioner, because I got a lot of value out of that. I've been getting a lot of value out of all of this. Let's see, do we have more stuff? Yes, we do. Another question for me to ask. Can you ask Gil about blending Western psychology methods, Tara Brach, Rain, Rick Hansen Heal, Richard Schwartz, IFS, with insight meditation as a way towards growth and integration, awakening?
So I don't know some of those. I certainly know Tara Brach's Rain and what she does. I don't know if I'm qualified to say much about these things. I'm not deeply studied in two of them. I don't know what they are even. But
which ones?
The second two. I know Tara Brach.
Rick Hansen.
Hansen. Yeah. So I know him. We're kind of friends, and we've talked. Haven't been a long time now. Yeah. Actually, he asked me to help write his book, but I declined.
Which one?
Oh, the first one.
Buddha's Brain?
Yeah. And
Wow, interesting backstory. I had no idea. Spilling the tea.
But I don't know. I don't track him. What he's doing. So the heal thing, I don't know what the heal is, but it's probably great.
IFS, by the way, the other one is, I believe, internal family systems, I think is what that stands
Oh,
for.
I see. Oh, I have a lot of respect for, family systems, I think I have a lot of respect for. And just today I was talking to someone who's had challenges with family, and I suggested that reading some books on family systems dynamics, not necessarily internal family, but external family. And it's, I think it's and one of the reasons why it's such a nice approach to psychotherapy is that it's not person-centered, in the sense that classic psychotherapy, the individual is the one who has the problems and you're fixing the individual. In family systems therapy, it's the family system which you look at. And so you're not highlighting the importance of the individual in the same way that you are in regular psychotherapy. And one of the dangers of mixing, and I think maybe addresses a little bit the question, mixing psychotherapy as it's taught in the West, United States, is that the psychotherapeutic culture that we're developing, and we have, it's our culture in the West, United States, is, for many people, has been so thoroughly influenced by psychotherapy and Freud and Jung and these strands that we don't even know it, how deeply it's embedded. But one of the issues about it is the degree to which it strengthens a certain kind of self-focus, a certain kind of over-involvement with one's own individualism, with oneself. And sometimes as a teacher, I meet a lot of people talk about their practice, and there are people who come and talk to me where they know they have all the right issues, they're working with things, and they're practicing sincerely and dedicatingly. But as I listen to them, I start hearing I, me, said so many times that I began thinking, wait a minute, I think even though they're practicing sincerely and have so much of the right understanding, I think they don't, like a fish doesn't see the water they're in. I don't think they see the conceit that they're operating under. And the whole psychotherapeutic culture is supporting this kind of conceit on self and self-involvement. And so, so that's the danger I see of mixing psychotherapy here in the United States, at least, with Buddhism, is it comes along with this almost a cultural baggage of overemphasis on the individual or on self and self-involvement and self-improvement, and even as it's so helpful for some people, the more contemporary movement of self-compassion has been invaluable for some people, but for some individuals it just becomes one more peg of self, and so that's my concern.
Thank you for that. Makes sense.
And I send people to therapy sometimes. It's invaluable therapy, and some people are not going to go very far in the Buddhist practice. And I was never trained as a therapist, but if you're a Dharma teacher in the United States and you haven't been trained in therapy, you get on-the-job training. Because our minds are so psychotherapeutically informed.
Well, thanks for that, Gil. I really appreciate that. And again, we keep touching on this idea of turning practice into another way to be I, right? Even when we were talking about me going off on retreat to do my very noble practice of abandoning the self that requires me to go. Yeah, you get the idea. It's just cool to see these themes reemerge. All right, so someone asked I think in response to your answer on the topic of jhana and samadhi, someone said, what does that mean? People, it's not appropriate for. I think you were talking about how there are some people for whom directing them toward, I think what you were talking, you said not appropriate for. I think you're talking about jhana practice. I think the person is referring to something you were saying about jhana practice, and perhaps you not necessarily guiding certain people to explore deep jhana being not appropriate for them. They were just asking, what does that mean?
Well, maybe this is a bit of Gil's pop psychology, but just like some people are right-handed and some people are left-handed, and you have a left-handed person, and it's not really appropriate to tell them they have to now start writing with the right hand. I think there are some minds that are more mindfulness minds, and some minds that are more concentration minds. And so to tell the people who have a strong mindfulness streak that they're supposed to now switch over to do concentration, it goes against the grain. It doesn't really work for them. That's not what how their mind is, and vice versa. And then some people are ambidextrous, right? So there's probably more humans who are ambidextrous in terms of mindfulness and concentration than we have ambidextrous-handed people. But still, we have to be careful for the individual variation of humans, and minds are built differently. As you know, you have this gifted mind that some of us don't have.
Fair enough. Thank you for framing it that way. It's a nice framing. Let's see. So, someone asked, how much longer until I think we'll make this our last question, although maybe if we do this one quickly, we can circle back to Liz and get that second question. And we can all finally know what that second question was instead of letting it be an eternal mystery. All right, anyway, this question. How much longer until your parenting responsibilities shift to being an empty nester? If that is on the horizon, how will your own meditation practice shift with the additional time you might have? For example, or will you be doing longer retreats or ... question mark?
Yeah, so apparently how it works these days, empty nesting is a temporary phenomena. My one son came back from college. They're both home right now, but one is only home for a week or so. But the other one, the older one, came home to spend this summer with us because he didn't want to pay rent anywhere. So
relatable content.
Sorry?
Oh, I just said relatable content.
So so it's and then recently my wife likes to do long backpacking trips called through hikes. So I had 6 weeks this winter where she was walking the Appalachian Trail. So then I was really empty nest. It was just the cat and I, and we usually get along. So, but then now that I have more time, and I don't know if it's because I have more time. It's always been my sense of my inner sense is following this Dharma sense that I have, that at some point as I got older, I would go back and do another round of long retreats. And I had a conversation with a friend about a month or 2 months ago or so, where in that conversation, I had the strong, okay, it's time. That the time has arrived for that. So I'm going to do a month-long retreat next year. It takes me a year to kind of get things organized. And so I'll be off on retreat. And it's been probably 10 years since I did a month-long retreat for myself.
Well, mazel tov. That's really exciting. Do you know where you're going to be sitting?
If I get in, it'll be at the Forest Refuge at IMS. So I'm on the, waiting list right now.
Wait, when did you say it's going to be?
Next year, next spring.
Already on? There's a wait list already?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I'm heading up there this summer, actually.
Great.
Yeah. All right. So what do you think about doing a quick a quick Liz revisit. Is that okay with you? And then we'll wrap, or do you want to wrap now?
I'm happy for that.
Liz, would you like to ask your second question, and then
Sure.
we'll call it?
Yeah, thank you very
Excellent.
much. Really appreciate it. You know, now I'm thinking maybe it's not a good question, blah, 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 but I want to know anyway. And thanks for answering it. If your motivation for practice is I am suffering. and I
Say
would like-
it again.
If your motivation for practice is I am suffering and I would like to suffer less, is that a Dharma motivation, or is that an ego motivation, or is it something else?
Oh, it's, you know, in the Dharma, it's not a crime to have ego. You know, these poor Buddhists who think that they're somehow criminals for having some conceit and ego is rather unfortunate. It just hurts to be egotistical. It hurts to have conceit. And but there might be some conceit involved with that, but it's a beautiful combination, because if there's conceit involved in wanting to be free of suffering, the path to be free of suffering has to go through looking at that conceit as well. And so don't worry about it until that day comes. And the conceit that you have might keep you motivated and going. And just because you have some conceit doesn't mean you have to get rid of it right away. Get rid of it when it's no longer useful. So you do and because if the motivation is to be free of suffering, as I said, sooner or later, you'll have to address that particular suffering, the suffering of self. And hopefully you'll know when that is, when it's time.
Thank you very much. More things
you,
to think
Liz.
about. Thank you. Thank you very much, John. Thank you. Gil. Thank you.
Well, I think that's a really nice place to wrap. So thank you, Gil, so much. This was really a lovely conversation. It is very rare. I've never had it happen before where the spotlight is turned around and I'm suddenly in the hot seat. That was harrowing, but honestly, it was a blast. I'm glad you did it. And I hope people got something out of it and it wasn't just me rambling. But I want to post again Gil's information, his website, the website for his center, Insight Meditation Center in Northern California, insightmeditationcenter.org, where you can find the many wonderful Dharma talks that are recorded as audio that Gil makes available for free on the internet. You can hang out with us, with sit heads if you want to. So everything we do is free and donation based. We have wonderful teachers join us from time to time. We also just get together and talk about practice ourselves. We meditate together a lot. We hang out and meditate together in this spontaneous way using the Slack platform. So you should join us for that too. And then that's it. You know, Gil, do you have any final things that you want to say before we close?
Well, I enjoyed coming to be with you, and the questions you asked, and the way that, John, you set it up, and the way that you present yourself in such a forward, honest way. It's clear to me that there's something really good going on here in this group. And I just want to offer you my encouragement and just my mirroring back to you that there's something really good happening here. And I hope that you will continue and go as far as it'll go with your community.
Well, that means a lot. That really means a lot, Gil. Thank you. Thank you, everyone who showed up. Thank you, everyone who asked a question. Thank you, everyone who listened to the questions being asked. Thank you for your time, for your attention, for your practice. And we'll see you another time. Have a wonderful night, everybody. Thank you, Gil. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.